Welcome back to Woodturning 101, lesson number 5. This is about pin turning. And before we get started, I've been standing here filing the tool rest to try to get all the dinks out of it that occur because this is cast iron and it's soft. And as we turn pins, which are very small and very delicate, any dinks or bumps on this will transfer right through your tool to the wood surface. And so what we want to try to do is eliminate as much of those as possible. So I've taken a file. You should always have this in your toolkit to take off as many of these burrs. In the picture in the corner you'll see I've got my finger marking some of the deep gouges in this tool rest that I could not get out. But I've done a good job of cleaning this edge up. I want my tool to slide as smoothly as I can. So I'm just using some inexpensive paste wax on the tool rest, a little black from the metal, rub that out. Now my tool is going to slide really nice and smooth along here, and as I work on my pin, it's going to come out as nice as we can. Well, before we get started, let me kind of show you some of the things we need. This is a little place to lay things. First thing we have to do is to get a pin blank, which typically is a piece of wood 3/4 square by about 5 inches long, which means all the junk wood in your studio you can trim down, throw in a box, and call it pin blanks. The next thing we need to do is to cut it, and those cuts are a function of what comes in the kit. This is called a 7mm or American Slim, a whole bunch of different names for it, but it's the basic kit. And when you buy a pin kit, you get a bag full of components. I like to close it back up so I don't lose any of the little pieces. And one of the components you get are a couple of brass tubes which have to be glued inside. So that means I need to drill, I need to cut, I need to glue, all in preparation for getting started. So what I've done, I've taken my brass tubes and laid them on my pin blank and marked where the cuts need to go. In this case, I'll get a little bit of wood left over. So I've cut them. And a little piece. Don't need it. So the next thing I've got to do is to drill a hole in this that's dead through the center and appropriate for this tube. So every kit you buy comes with a set of instructions, and instructions say what size holes to drill among a whole bunch of other things. So right now we're worried with hole drilling. And I want to get it in the center, and there's many different ways to do it. If you have a drill press, I suggest that you take a screw clamp like this, cut a notch in it. You can set this flat on the table of your drill press and drill straight. That's one way. If you have a nice chuck, such as this one, you can buy jaws for it that allow you to hold the blank in the corners like this. These chucks are somewhat expensive, and I've already said that buying a 4-jaw scroll chuck is one of your early investments in turning. And all this would require is a set of specialized jaws for this purpose. It's another way. The way I'm going to do it is to use a chuck that didn't cost me very much at all. That's specific for doing holes in pins. So what I'm going to do is screw this onto here like this, and fits my standard thread jaws, and it's operated by a pair of levers. One goes into the back and one goes into the front, and by moving these two levers I can open and close the sides of these jaws. And what I'm going to do is grab the blank by the corners. Got to open it up a little bit more maybe. Just by the corners. And tighten the chuck And now it's going to hold it in those corners, and what that means is that it's being held very well centered. I'll take my 2 bars. And at the last thing you do, tighten the rods, holds this. And now what I can do is to drill. Remember the other accessory we showed you in one of the earlier lessons, and that was the Jacob's chuck, which will fit into our tailstock. In this case, the bit I'm going to use is what's called a 7mm bit, because that's the one that perfectly fits that brass tube for the kit that we start with. And I want to encourage you to use a fairly short bit rather than one of these longer ones. The longer ones tend to wander a little bit. I'd rather not do that. So my bit goes into the chuck. I tighten it down. Yeah, I take all my stuff out of the way. And I'm going to drill a hole in each of the 2 blanks. 2 rest is out of the way. I bring this up to roughly the center, lock the tailstock. I've set the speed down to 500 RPM. In drilling, you want to go very slowly. If you drill at faster speeds, the wood heats up. Moisture that's in the wood, and there's always some, will cause the fibers to expand and the bit can bind. We can actually burn. Just drill at low speeds. So I'm going to drill this one, then I'm going to drill the other one, and then I'll show you what the next step is. Locked. Now in drilling, I've gone a little bit of the distance and I'm backing the drill out. I want to make sure the flute is clean of any chips. I can advance this now, take another cut for a little bit, clean it, advance it, lock it. Continue this process. You see how the chips build up? If you don't stop and do this, it's quite possible that the bit will tend to wander off center and it will not drill straight. Even though the flutes extract some of the sawdust, it's important that I make sure all of it is out. 2 or 3 turns, clear it, continue. And you see how they're building up in here. The fiber's actually expanding and almost locking into the flute of the drill. And we're through. So now I'm going to do that on the other one, and then I'll show you the next step. The other thing I have done, I've marked with a line here which portions belong with each other, so I don't get this thing mixed up in the wrong orientation. I've also drilled from the center of the pen, which is going to be here, out towards the back end, in case I had some blowout, in other words, fibers actually tearing free from the exiting of the drill bit, that it's on the waste side, not on the good side. So I drilled this first piece from here. The second piece, I'll drill from exactly the same location, back into the jaws, use my little miniature Tommy bars. I forgot which way to turn. This way. Lock it. Now drill the next piece. And we can do that off camera. Finished drilling the second blank. Both were drilled from the center. So there is going to be my pen. I'll take this chuck off. I don't need it anymore. And in order to prepare for turning, I need to glue these 2 brass tubes into the center. In order to do that, first of all, the tubes are very smooth. I want to rough them up a little bit. So I'm going to take a piece of coarse sandpaper and abrade this tube as much as I can. 80 grit would be fine for this, 60, whatever. But all we're doing is making the surface rough enough that when we glue it, the glue will stick. Now do both tubes. Doesn't take us a few seconds, but it needs to be done. And I'm rotating the tube in my hand so it's ready to glue. So now to glue this in, I'm going to use CA glue, cyanacrylate glue, and I'm using what's called medium. There's thick, medium, thin. I don't want to use thin. What happens with the thin, it's like water. It runs right through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tube, I'm going to put a little bit of glue on it. If you don't want to hold on to these things, gloves work nicely. Also, a pencil would be a nice insertion tool. I put some around about 2/3 of it. I'm going to basically just twist it in and push, and then set it aside. And then I'm going to do the other one the same way. Wrong bottle. And I put the glue about 2/3 of the way up, that's all, because as I screw it into here, now, I would like that glue to set quickly, so I'm going to use a little accelerator, because waiting a whole minute is a long time. When I'm done with the glue, rather than putting the top right back on it, I'd like to leave the top setting until the end of the video and then put it on. I'd like to see the glue run back down into the bottle, thus keeping the opening clear. If I tap it up now, it might trap just enough moisture in there that the glue will harden right in this area here, and I have to use a drill bit to get it open again. So I'm going to leave it this way temporarily and out of the picture. The accelerator, done. So now I'm waiting for the glue to dry. This medium thick is going to take maybe a minute or so to dry, and then as soon as it's dry, I'll show you what the next step is. Well, I waited for a little while for the glue to dry, and generally I glue them up at night, set them aside, come back the next day to be absolutely certain the glue is dry. So these are dry, ready to go. But I want to true up these ends and make sure that brass tube and the wood is absolutely aligned in the same plane, and all this extra glue that might be proud of the wood surface is removed back down on both ends. As you might not be able to see, on the far end, the tube is shorter than the wood to allow for a little of that blowout if there was some tearing of the fibers at the very end. So that has to be squared off. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called a pen mill that will fit down inside the brass tube and cut this end dead square. These faces need to be sharpened. This tube right here has to be proper for the size of brass tube that's inserted, so they come with sets. I'm going to put it in the headstock, use my Jacob's chuck here. I'm still at 500 RPM, which is perfect for this. I'm going to put it over, and you can see some glue flying away. And I'm getting that end dead square. This end here where there's a lot of wood, I've got to bring it down. And the other one. This can be done on a drill press. This can be done with a hand drill. And if you can see here, the surface now is dead flat to the brass tube. And I'll do that on all four faces, and I'll be right back. Okay, I finished, and if you can see on this one, I had to remove a considerable amount of wood in order to get down to where the brass tube was. Here you can see, this is the end I inserted from, it's almost flat, but I needed that flat. And so now I'm ready to turn the pen. I got it in here pretty tight, which is what I should have done. Use our knockout bar to remove the chuck. I know that in pen turning there's lots of accessories. Unfortunately, there are a lot of accessories. The good news is you buy them one time. So what we're now going to introduce you to is another way of mounting on the lathe, which is our third method. It's called a mandrel. It fits into the headstock. For this particular kit, there's a set of 3 bushings. The bushings allow us to establish the diameters we need at these different points for the pen. So the first bushing goes on, the wood blank goes on, a bushing goes between to establish the diameter here and here. The second blank goes on. Notice that I have lined up the witness marks. Third bushing goes on. And there is a dimple in the end of these that allow you to put your live center in to hold the other end of this mandrel. I recommend not doing that because that hole gets elongated, it gets misshapen, and all of a sudden this is not going at all where you think it is. I recommend that you buy what's called a mandrel saver of many different brands on the market. This again was a fairly inexpensive one. It slides over the mandrel, fits into my tailstock, and provides pressure on the bushings and the wood, but not deflecting the mandrel itself. There's no pressure on the mandrel. This is nice and locked. This I've got some good pressure on, and I've got it locked. Bring my tailstock, my tool rest over where I want it. And remember, we were at 500 RPM, so I need to get this up to turning speed. And my preferred thing for something this small in diameter is to go all the way to 2700 RPM because it's very small in diameter. So let's move the belts up to that speed. I'm free to rotate properly. The smaller the project in diameter, the faster your turning speed needs to be in order to maintain the same speed of wood moving past the cutting edge. I'm going to use 2 tools. My favorite spindle rough and gouge to knock the corners off and get it basically round. And I'm going to go to the skew chisel to plane the shape down to the required dimensions with a very, very smooth surface, thus reducing the amount of sanding and work I have to do. So let's put that away. I'm clear. Roughing out. Here the pitch of the wood is much higher because we're running much faster. I'm also taking very light cuts. I don't need pressure. Basically just touching my finger. Now if you're worried about running into metal here or here, remember I can roll this tool up on its side and use the side of it to come very close without any possibility of running into the end of the mandrel. So that's round, I can tell by the sound. Well, I'd better roll the tool this direction, shouldn't I, to come this way. I can feel the bumping, I can hear it, and all of a sudden the sound has changed, and that gives me my first clue that it probably is round. And we can check that. Well, it looks 99% round, one little tiny spot, but that'll clearly go away. So now I can take some more off with this tool, or I can go right to my skew chisel. I think I'll take it down just a little bit more, and then go to my skew chisel. For our 7mm pen kits, 3/4 piece of wood is plenty big enough. Having filed the tool rest makes it so much easier to slide my tool along here. So, I think I'm going to take it down to these bushing dimensions by using my skew chisel. because this is that planing cut that we did in lesson 1. With the tip down, I can get very close. With the tip up, I can do equally well. So I can use the tool this direction or this direction. Lay it on the wood, on the tool rest, raise my hand until the edge engages. I get it just a little dust. Stop, freeze my body, slide the tool. And since this is a matter of just reducing diameter until I get something that looks pleasing, I'm close there. I'm not done, but I'm close. So I'm going to turn around and go the other way. You can do this with a gouge. There's no reason not to. Now you have to also start thinking about shape. What is comfortable for you to hold? I'm visualizing the tip of the pen is here and the clip or the top is here. So I'm thinking this is the part that's going to be writing. So how do I want that to fit my fingers? And that is something to turn the lathe off and test it, or turn it to a particular dimension. I'm going to just test it. I want a little bit of a bump here, just my choice. And I'm within a 16th inch of the, or less 32nd inch of the bushing, so that inch is fairly close. And you see these are all planing cuts, but they're very light. Now, other piece, the top. Because of the way the pen kit is built, I have a little knob on the clip, which allows me to have clearance under the clip, so I can put a little curve in here if I want to. Good opportunity to practice your planing cuts. In many kits, the bushings here, here, and here are different sizes. So getting the pieces oriented properly is really, really important. And then when they come off the lathe, keeping that orientation when you assemble the kit is important. So in this case, all of these are the same. So if I get them mixed up from an assembly point of view, it's okay. I don't want to do that. I'm close. It's too much of a bump. I don't want to quite that bulbous. I'm cutting very lightly, and I'm going to go back and forth over it several times. And I'm going to get close to the bushings. Then I'm going to check. So I'm going to check and see how close I am. I'm going to take my fingernail and see if it hangs up just a little bit. Because when I sand, that's going to take off a little bit more wood. So I need to be just a little bit proud. I can take a bit more off of this one right here. I like to use the long point of the skew when I do this so I can see when I come near the metal bushing. My view is not obstructed. Feels good. Okay, tools away, sanding time. And to do that, I remove my tool rest. And I have a set of sandpaper here. I'm going to start with 180, 120 actually I have here, then 180, then 220, and lastly 400 grit. 120 only if I need to take it down a little bit more to get closer. Some tricks on sanding. One, don't sand the metal. And if I sand this direction towards the metal and I run off onto it, do not come back on, because that will sand the metal, bring gray pieces of metal back up into the wood. So always sand toward the bushing. Now, even in those few short strokes, I see circular marks around here caused by that sandpaper. So before I go on, sanding with the grain is very, very important. And that's to take off the circular marks that I put on there with the 120 sandpaper. And I sand until all those marks are gone. And I'm in a soft wood. This is walnut. And because it's walnut, it's fairly soft. It's going to show those marks very easily. So that's 120. Now 180. Always keep the paper moving. Do it this way so you can see better. And I'm right, well, this one's still a little proud of the bushing. We're doing pretty good. Okay, so now we sand again with the grain. Bright light is really important. It helps us to be able to see where those marks are. Sometimes light in the classroom is not as good as we'd like to have, so I take things outside in the sunlight. .220. I want to do it this way so you can see better. Yeah, with the grain again. As the grit gets finer, I don't have to spend quite as much time taking marks out. Runner grit. Now there's so many different ways to do pens. There are so many hundred different kits. Sometimes pen turning becomes a whole hobby unto itself. Trying different kits, trying different woods, seeing what different kinds of finishes we can work with, and so on. But what we're going to do is the most basic today. We've taken this piece of walnut down to our dimensions, tip, center band, clip end. Then I'm going to put a finish on it. It's called a friction polish. There's many different brands of it, and it's basically shellac and little carnauba wax mixed together. And they will tend to separate out a little bit when the bottle stands. This one's kind of mixed back up again because I've been moving it around the shop. So I'm going to shake it real good to be sure it's well mixed. And I'm going to use a paper towel. Particularly, I like these blue shop towels. I like them because they're softer than our kitchen paper towels. And I'm just going to roll it up into a little bit of a pad. I'm going to put a little bit on. A little bit on, turn the lathe on. It's much better to put several thin coats on than one big coat because it will tend to get streaky otherwise. So a little bit. Now the shellac will evaporate and leave the wax. So we've got a coat on. And I'm going to take a clean piece of paper towel. At this RPM, I'm going to hold my finger and paper towel against the wood with some pressure. And I wish you could see this, but what happened as I heat it up, the carnauba wax dissolves, melts into the wood, and a little gloss builds. Now we can get a nice gloss. I can put more coats on. We do it all over again. I'll do one more time. A little drop. Burnish it. Oh yeah, my finger's getting really hot. That's good. actually leaning against this a little bit. And so the wax came off here. And if you smell it, it's carnauba wax, and you recognize the smell. It's very pleasant. Very pleasant smell. Okay, we'll close this back up again so I don't spill any. And now the goal is to take it off of the mandrel and assemble the components. So what I'm going to do is clear the decks here. Really clear the decks. Well, I couldn't move it because it's wedged against the tool rest. Now, remember, I want to keep these components in the right order, so I am not going to take them off the mandrel. Reach for my knockout bar. Let me just keep them like that for a couple minutes. Now, assembling them, we need to press the components together, and there are various devices for that. One of the most common one is a press like this, where I put the parts here and apply mechanical pressure this way. This is one way to do it. You could buy one of these at any of the woodworking dealers. Another way is to use a couple of centers that are designed to fit into the headstock and the tailstock of the lathe, and to use the mechanical advantage of the lathe to push these together. So that's what I'm going to do. So now I have to get out all my components for the kit, lay them out here in the right order, and then go to assembly. So let me get something where I can lay these components out. A little desk space here. So here's my kit. I put all the parts back in the bag except for the brass tubes. And now I'll take them all out. We have a tip, which is going to go on this end. We have a center band, which is going to go right there. And we have a clip. It's going to go here. It's two parts. There's the clip, and here's the piece that holds the clip in place. So we know where those pieces go. Inside goes what's called a transmission. It's pushed in here, brass in first, and that's what allows the pin to go up and down. The last thing goes in is the refill. So let me start by removing the bushing. That piece goes there. This piece goes here. And now I know where everything goes. And it's important, as I said, in some kits where all these dimensions might be different, to keep the pieces in the right order. So first thing I'm going to do is to insert the tip. I'll take that little bar out of there for a second. And this is going to get pushed in here that way. So in order to get enough room to work, I'm going to set this collection of components aside. Step down the camera for a second, but now back to my clip, to my tip. Bring my tailstock over and lock it. And I'm making sure this is lined up properly. And with just a little pressure, pushes in. Now the reason for the bushings to get these dimensions is I want this to be a smooth transition from here to here. So if I turn it to the right dimension, that'll happen. But let me finish the base, because I now have to install the transmission in here. Brass end first. Now, I kind of know how far it goes, but because kits are not necessarily that uniform, I'm going to stop and test every now and then. I know that the brass needs to disappear inside. Now the brass has disappeared. There's another little band here which is supposed to be a depth mark, but I don't trust it, so I'm going to take and put the refill in, screw it into place, run the pin tip down, and to see how far it's coming through. It's not quite as far as it should be. So I'm going to take the refill out, and I am going to continue to push this in about to where the mark is, where the kit manufacturer said I should. Now the refill goes in, tighten it down, extend it, it's like that, retracted. That looks good. I like that. So let's say this portion is completed. I'll set it aside. Holding my pieces in the right order. The clip now gets assembled into this end. Need to come in a little closer, lock it down, press. That's done, and guess what? The decorative band literally slides over the shaft. The top goes on. And we have our first 7mm pen. Thousands of different kits, as I said, available. A lot of opportunity. So this is a chance to hold things using a mandrel, establishing dimensions by using a set of bushings, and working very carefully with our skew chisel to get the smoothest possible surface as we can. 7mm pen kits. The instructions for this are not in the book, but they are separately available, and they will be posted on my webpage under the pen turning section. You'll find the instructions for the 7mm pen, and on the other side at davebentley.com you'll find a reference to where they can be located. Thanks for watching. Next lesson, guess what? We're going to hold things on the lathe again in a little different manner. See you then.